Thanks, everyone. Just as a quick aside before I start, John Roscoe mentioned the Front Royal statement several times in his speech there. I happen to have a couple of copies with me here because last night, through both a happy coincidence and also an unfortunate clash, we had one of the conveners and co-authors of the Front Royal statement here in Melbourne. His name is Bishop James Connolly. And he gave a talk at an event for the Chesterton Academy of Melbourne. So if anyone would like a copy of that, it's on the internet, but if you want a hard copy, come and grab it off me. It's a really beautiful and important document, as John illustrated. So yeah, my topic for today is first things first, recovering the purpose of education. And I apologise if you're starting to feel like you're getting death by classical education today. I guess it must be important in the renewal of Western civilization. That must be why it keeps coming up again and again. So the first things first. The question that we've stopped asking in education. Australia seems to be continually holding a big national conversation about education. There's a sort of continuing sense of crisis in education for a whole bunch of reasons. We argue about funding. Schools aren't getting enough funding. There's teacher shortages. Teachers are getting out of the profession. They don't want to do it anymore. The curriculum. There's all these arguments over the curriculum. What's in there? What's missing? What needs to be taken out? We need to be testing everything and making sure the graphs are always going up. Should we be doing phonics? And how much should screens be in the classroom? What are the NAPLAN results like? It's a big thing. The Herald Sun, I've noticed, has a whole education section now in their daily newspaper, which points to the level of interest people have and the level of controversy that surrounds it. Every year there's reviews commissioned, people write reports, the governments are always announcing various reforms with the regularity of the seasons. These things all happen. And all of these actions, all this conversation, all this activity, it has about the same effect as the weather on the educational outcomes that our children receive, which is to say not much. The question that's almost never asked is, what is education actually for? What is education actually for? What are we trying to do here? Maybe that's too simple. Maybe that's too hard. Maybe it's too revolutionary, because it gets to the very root of what a civilization's trying to accomplish and what it wants to pass on. What is education actually for? If you look at a school's website, usually they'll have their school motto, or maybe their mission statement pasted very prominently on the school website. Maybe you drive in the front of the school and you'll see the motto on the gate. Here's a couple of common mottos that you'll see very similar mottos to these at a lot of schools. We are educating for the 21st century. Okay, but what's that mean? In the 21st century, are we educating people to prepare for tyranny or for something good? What's going to happen in the 21st century? It's not telling us. It's a meaningless statement. We're educating to help students reach their full potential. Sounds good, but hang on. Potential for what? Are they going to be are we reaching their potential as mathematicians or as scientists or as human beings? It's not clear. Potential's an empty kind of value, right? It's got to be directed towards something, potential to do something. And that's not made clear. Another common slogan: excellence, innovation, integrity. Excellence at what? You can be an excellent counterfeiter. You could be an excellent murderer. Excellence at what? Innovation. Are we making students or smartphones? What's innovation mean for a student to be innovative? Is that really a significant goal? And integrity. Okay, finally, this one actually sounds pretty good. But it also feels a little bit like they've just added it on the end because the first two make it sound like we're describing a hedge fund rather than a school. Maybe it's not really what the school's about. Anyway, so this is a question that no school can avoid answering. What is education for? Every school is going to answer it whether they mean to or not. G.K. Chesterton warned that every education teaches a philosophy, if not by dogma, then by suggestion, by implication, by atmosphere. And unless the parts of an education combine to convey some general view of life, then it's not really an education at all. There's no neutral school. Every school is going to form its students towards some vision of the good life. It can't avoid it. The only real choice lies between a school that knows what it's forming children for, that's doing it consciously, and a school that forms students blindly, by accident. Maybe they're trying to avoid those sort of questions, but in avoiding them, you end up answering them anyway. When a government school doesn't teach about God, when they say, we're not going to talk about God, we're neutral, they are teaching about God. You can't avoid saying something. If you're not teaching anything about God, that's saying something about God. It's saying God's not important, or God's too controversial, God's too dangerous, don't go there. You're saying a lot by saying nothing about God. Christopher Dawson, whose name this centre honours, understood this idea, this problem, better than perhaps any historian in the last century. For Dawson, education in its fullest sense is the transmission of a culture from one generation to the next. And at the living heart of every culture lies a cult, a religion, a shared vision of ultimate things. A society has lost its vision, he said. A society which has lost its vision becomes sooner or later a society which has lost its culture. Sound familiar? I think we might be there. A system of schooling severed from that heart does not become neutral, it becomes hollow. It can still train, it can still sort and credential students, but it can't really form them because it doesn't really know what a human being is for anymore. Christopher Dawson also argued that religion forms the core of a civilization. If the religious foundation erodes, we lose that, the culture is going to decay and it's going to get replaced by a new spiritual impulse. Maybe communism, nationalism, secular humanism, even atheism. Does it sound familiar? I think Christopher Dawson, there's starting to be a good argument that he was born yesterday and not 100 years ago. He's describing the world we live in. Today I want to make three claims. First, our education system has largely forgotten what education is for. And the symptoms of that forgetting, they're all around us. Second, the older tradition of classical Christian education remembered, and it remembered well. And remembering is important. Okay, memory is actually one of the three faculties of the soul. It's fundamental to being a human being. Sometimes I think that the Enlightenment, the whole project of the Enlightenment for the last 200 years, it seems to be to forget, to cut us off from the past, to cut us off from memory. That's another story. And thirdly, there's a renewal underway across the world. Other people have spoken about it today. It's been going on for a while across the world, and it's really starting to take hold in Australia now. And this renewal shows that recovery is impossible. Indeed, it's already begun. I should say at this point that I'm not a disinterested observer. I'm trying to start the Chesterton Academy of Melbourne along with a group of other parents and teachers. So I've got some skin in the game. Okay, the first point, the great forgetting. So the symptoms of the forgetting that's occurred, they're not hard to find. We've spent decades increasing our spending on education, very carefully measuring the effect of various interventions in the classroom in scientific studies on the educational outcomes. If you're a teacher, your skin will start to crawl at the mention of John Hattie. Literacy, numeracy, and critical thinking outcomes across the Western world, and Australia included. At the same time, we've been increasing the spending and really trying to apply science and try as hard as we can to fix things. Things just keep going down. Literacy, numeracy, they're all going backwards. Every time there's the decline, you can see the social scientists pulling their hair out. What's going on? We're applying science, we're putting money into it, things are getting worse. What's going on? How does it work? We don't know. We keep adjusting the machinery of education, tinkering with the bits and pieces, but we never stop and ask what the machine is actually supposed to produce. What is education for? Worse than the results is the redefinition of purpose that lies underneath them. Okay, a lot of the analysis and the hand-wringing that goes on about education, it actually misses the real problem. Schooling is now discussed almost entirely in the language of skills, credentials, employability, and national productivity. The student is seen as human capital. Education, for many parents, is an investment portfolio, and the ATAR is the dividend. Okay, I spend my money, I want my kids to come out at the other end, to get a good job and grow the national, the national economy. But no mother has ever gazed lovingly into the cot at her baby and said, "One day, my darling, you'll be a flexible unit of human capital." That's not what human beings are for. Maybe economists, maybe that's how we get economists, I don't know. That's not fair to economists. They're good people. Okay, so these are good things. Skills, credentials, employability, these are great things, but they can't be the main thing. These are second things. These are not first order things. A curriculum ordered only towards trying to accomplish those things becomes what you might call a fast food menu. It's quick, it's processed, but it's going to be forgotten by dinner. The child will be fed in a sense, but they're not going to be nourished. Their soul will not be filled by that. The very word school, it stands as a rebuke to this way of thinking. It comes from the ancient Greek word skole. Skole means leisure. The word for school actually means leisure. Hands up if that's how you think back on your school life. Leisure. Some of us do, but not many of us. Okay, but this leisure that Pieper was talking about, this is from a book by Joseph Pieper called Leisure, the Basis of Culture. It's a brilliant book and I think one of the key texts for this renewal in classical education. Leisure in Pieper's sense doesn't mean idleness. It doesn't mean lying on a couch and watching TV and sipping on a cocktail on the beach or something like that. It means the free, unhurried attention to what is true, good, and beautiful. He called this the basis of culture itself. This kind of activity is the basis of culture, the basis of civilization. The ancients would have thought that it's strange that we would name our institutions, our educational institutions, schools, after the name for leisure, but then run them as if it's a kind of factory, a production line. They would have thought that's weird. The purpose of education, it can't primarily be making a line go up on an economic graph. That can't be what education's about. It can't be attaining wealth or social status. That can't be what it's about. Because that's not the purpose of what being a human being is about. Education's supposed to be about making us fully human beings. And what's the purpose of being a human being? I would say it's to get into heaven, to be in communion with God. And more precisely, it's to become the sort of person who desires heaven and who wants to become the kind of person who can get into heaven and to then live accordingly, to live a life that will make that possible. Alongside this instrumentalism of education, treating human beings as a means to this other end, comes fragmentation. That schooling is very fragmented. The modern curriculum is a corridor of unconnected rooms. You do a period of mathematics here, some history over there, then you have a period of well-being because you have to undo all the stress and the disorientation and the alienation that all the other subjects are causing the students. It's not entirely the fault of schools, but it is very interesting as a teacher, the rise of anxiety, stress, and other kinds of mental health issues in students. We're doing something really wrong. But there's no unifying vision in the school to explain why are we doing all of this? What's the big picture? What's it all for? How does it all fit together? We never do anything like that. This is precisely the condition that Chesterton diagnosed. The parts don't combine to convey a general view of life. We're not giving students a big picture sense of what life is about. And the fragmentation contributes to the amnesia. Our students are the heirs to the intellectual and moral estate of a great civilization, the greatest civilization. From Athens and Jerusalem through to Augustine and Aquinas, Dante, Shakespeare, Newton, John Henry Newman, but no one's told them about this inheritance. In fact, many of them do not even know these names. I actually have a little test that I do when I meet students. If I'm talking to a random kid who might be in year 10 or 11 or something like that, and especially if they're at a Catholic school, I'll say, have you ever heard of Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine? Often the answer is no. I would say most of the time. Christopher Dawson devoted a whole book, The Crisis of Western Education, to this severing of education from its cultural and religious roots. He predicted its consequences with uncomfortable accuracy. The cultural amnesia, he suggested, and fragmentation would lead to a spiritual vacuum that would be filled by ideology. He predicted a technocracy without wisdom. So we've become very powerful, but lack the wisdom to use that power wisely. He expected a state that would displace other authorities, such as the church or other civic institutions. He proposed as a remedy the systematic study of Christian culture as a whole, a religious and cultural unity, and this vision of his has influenced the liberal arts renewal that's happened over the last few decades. For Catholics, however, the sharpest symptom of all of this failure is the failure to hand on the faith itself. On the statistics that are commonly cited, the best statistics I can find, fewer than 5% of Catholic children in this country still practice the faith when they leave home. I suspect the number is closer to 1 or 2%, but I couldn't get an exact number. It's definitely under 5%. That statistic keeps me awake at night. I'm not joking. I think it should keep every Catholic parent, every Catholic educator, and definitely every Catholic bishop awake at night too. We have to be honest about what it tells us. We are completely failing to pass on the faith to our kids. In cultural soil that is now openly hostile to faith, it's no longer enough for children to learn their prayers, receive the sacraments, and hear a few stories from the Bible. That worked in the past, not anymore. Okay, I think we all know that. A faith presented as one compartment among many in a school, one subject in the corridor of unconnected rooms, will be discarded along with the rest of the timetable on the last day of Year 12. C.S. Lewis put the diagnosis for this problem in a simple principle. You can't get second things by putting them first. You can only get second things by putting first things first. Our schools have put second things first. Getting results, getting rankings, employability, being relevant. The bitter irony is that we're now losing those two. Okay, the graphs, despite the complete focus on these kind of national productivity contributing metrics, the graphs are still going down, even though that's the only thing they're trying to do anymore. They're not even trying to do anything else. Okay, but the classical tradition, what did it know? The classical liberal arts tradition never suffered from this confusion because it began with a clear answer to the question of purpose. Education exists to form a human being, a good human being, to teach the child what is true, to love what is beautiful, and to choose what is good. Everything else, the skills, examinations, and careers, they all follow on from that. It's not to say they're not important. It's not to say, you shouldn't want them, but they follow on from focusing on what's first. The tradition speaks of love before it speaks of knowledge. Augustine taught that virtue is rightly ordered love. Plato before him insisted the whole business of early education is to train the child to feel pleasure and pain at the right things, to delight in what is delightful and to recoil from what is base, before the child is able to give reasons for either one. Lewis called the fruit of this training the chest, the seat of formed sentiment that mediates between intellect and appetite, and he warned that an education which neglects this will produce men without chests. You know the abolition of man? It's another really great seminal text in the classical education renewal. Highly recommend it. It's very small. Actually, Pieper's book and C.S. Lewis's book, both very small and only take you an afternoon to read. These men will be clever, they'll be credentialed, but they'll be lacking in virtue. The first task of a school, on the old view, is not the transfer of information of skills, transfer of information or skills, but the ordering of loves. We need to teach children to love rightly, the ordo amoris. The cultivation of attention, reverence, courage, self-discipline, friendship, wonder, and love. These are the purposes of education. This is why the tradition prized stories, fairy tales, myths, legends, the lives of the saints. These aren't decorative extras to a serious curriculum. They are the gymnasium of the moral imagination. In these, a child practices recognizing courage, loyalty, mercy, pride, sacrifice, temptation, repentance, and grace, long before life will demand these recognitions in earnest. A child who has sailed with Odysseus, ridden with King Arthur, who's watched Peter weep and Augustine confess, this child has rehearsed the drama of the moral life 1,000 times before they're starting to play it for keeps. This is why the tradition refused to treat faith as just one little compartment. In a genuinely Catholic education, faith is not one subject amongst all the others, but it's the key that unlocks all of them. It's where you begin to feel awe at the power of God in nature and in the impossible elegance and design of DNA. It's where you see the image of God in every human person. You start to see the golden thread of providence that runs through history. You see the mystery of the real presence in the Eucharist. Just to take one example, mathematics. This is a subject that I teach, it's my main subject, and it's the one that's most often assumed to be religiously neutral. You can't get God in mathematics, right? Galileo declared that mathematics is the language in which God has written the universe. Mathematics is the language in which God has written the universe. This implies first that the universe is a book of some kind. It's an ordered, intelligible work with an author. It's not a heap of happy accidents. It implies that when a child learns mathematics, he's learning to read slowly and in translation something that God has written. Every theorem mastered is a sentence deciphered. It corrects both of the modern errors about the subject, the way people tend to view mathematics. The secularist treats mathematics as evidence that the universe doesn't need an author at all. These are the rules. We don't need an author because we've got all these rules. But they never ask the question, why should nature be mathematically legible at all? Why are there rules? Do you get rules randomly? Rules usually written by a rule maker, by a lawgiver. To the utilitarian, they just treat mathematics as a toolkit for future employment. It's useful. Mathematics is very useful. It'll get you a job one day. And the reply to this is that, first of all, mathematics is an encounter with order and beauty of the divine mind. Why should mathematics be useful? It flows from that. It flows from the order and beauty from the divine mind. There's a famous essay called it's called something like The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences. Has anyone heard of that? It's really cool. It's really cool. It catalogues and tries to explore this idea that mathematicians keep coming up with interesting mathematical theories, ideas. They write down things on paper that, figuring out how things work mathematically. And then 50 years later, a scientist somewhere will do an experiment and find out that the only way to understand that experiment, to understand the universe that we actually live in, the physical world, is by reference to this abstract mathematical idea that someone discovered 50 years earlier. It's spooky. It's beyond coincidence. It's a finger pointing to God. A classic example is something called complex numbers. I won't explain what it is, but complex numbers were discovered by a mathematician as a lark, just having fun. He thought it was just completely meaningless and useless. And after he discovered it, he stuck it in a drawer and no one thought about it for 200 years or so. And then at the start of the 20th century, when quantum physics was starting to be developed, someone realized the only way they could understand quantum physics was using complex numbers. This thing that someone had just done for a joke they thought it had no connection to the real world, couldn't possibly have any connection to the real world, was necessary and essential to understand the world. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting excited about maths. I shouldn't get onto that topic. I get carried away. A school that teaches mathematics in the spirit of Galileo, the language in which God's written the universe, is going to provoke wonder in the student. Okay, and wonder, Aristotle observed, this is where all philosophy begins. You begin by wondering. Many parents wonder, when's this going to get me a job for my student? But what's true of mathematics is true across the whole curriculum. When you remove the centre, the parts do not carry on politely as an ensemble, they fly apart. In science too, there's this increasing understanding that science only arose in Western Christian Europe because of Christian philosophy underpinning that society, that culture. It didn't arise in in a culture random. It wasn't just luck that arose in Europe. There are ideas in Christian philosophy that made science possible. And as those ideas are starting to be lost, as our culture is eroding the Christian foundation, science is actually, weakening. And a lot of people are no longer accepting of science anymore. They think it's, they're not seeing it in its totality anymore. One more thing the tradition knew. School is not the primary educator, parents are. The school's task is to work with parents, preparing the soil in which faith and virtue can grow, not to replace them with professionals and reduce their involvement to a newsletter and a couple of parent-teacher interviews. Children are formed less by lessons than by the community around them, by their friends, their role models, the families they belong to. The desire to belong, it's a very powerful social force, and it will do its work either for the faith or against it. We're formed by the people around us. There's this really interesting psychological theory, which I think it's been largely borne out, and you can judge whether it's true in your own experience. It goes something like this. Children in their early years, let's say from 0 to 10, they will largely follow what their parents believe. No matter what their parents say, the children will just accept it because they're the parents. The parents are their whole world. But during adolescence, somewhere between the ages of 10 and 20, the children will start to adopt the morals and the worldview of their peers, of the other students around them. And the reason for this is that instinctively the children know that their peers are the ones they're going to have to live with in the world during their life. Okay, they're only going to be at home with their parents in their early years. They're going to have to live the rest of their life with their peers. And there's an instinct in us all that wants to fit in with the crowd, that wants to fit in with the people around us, that wants to be accepted by the world. And so this explains why so many Catholic parents, they send their children to a Catholic school, hoping that they'll receive the faith there and the faith will be passed on, only to have their children come out at the other end an atheist or an agnostic or whatever. And the reason is not hard to understand then, because for whatever reason, statistically, 90 to 95% of the students at Catholic schools are not practicing Catholics, or they're not Christians at all. So the few students who are Catholic, who are practicing the faith, they're surrounded by non-Catholics, and so they end up adopting that worldview. It's mathematical almost. So at the end of the day, it does actually take a village. That saying is true. It takes a village to raise a child, and it takes a village to pass on the faith. You can't do it the parents can't do it by themselves. They need a community around them to help pass on the faith. Your kids need Catholic friends, basically. Okay, the recovery, the renewal. If all this sounds like nostalgia, consider that it's being tested empirically now at scale all around the world. Over the past 10 years, more than 1,000 classical, Catholic and Christian schools have opened. Most of them have been in the United States, but there's some on every continent. This is the fastest growing movement in education, and it's growing because it works, and families can see that it works. The best evidence we have is something called the Good Soil Report. I encourage you to write that down and look it up. It's an amazing report, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. The University of Notre Dame has been doing a longitudinal sociological study for several decades, I think about 30 or 40 years. And what they've done is tracked American school graduates from the different school systems in America. So they looked at homeschoolers, they looked at private sort of non-religious schools, they looked at Catholic schools, they looked at Protestant schools or evangelical schools, public schools, government schools, which is the majority. They compared all these different school systems, and they were looking for what were the outcomes for their graduates, what were their, what would happen to these students after they graduated, what were their lives like. And in the last, they do this survey, I think about every 5 or 6 years, something like that. And in the last time they did it, for the first time, they included graduates of classical Christian schools. It was the Association of Classical Christian Schools that were included. And the reason they were included was because they'd by that point been around long enough to have enough graduates to make their participation in the survey meaningful. Now, these schools that they studied, the classical Christian schools, these were largely Protestant, but I think that what the study measured, the kind of model that these schools represent, the model of a classical Christian, parent-partnered, formation-focused school, that it very much applies to classical Catholic schools, such as the Chesterton Academies that I'll talk more about later. So although it's focused on a particular kind of classical school, I think it applies to all, I believe. And the results of this survey were absolutely astonishing. You know, as a maths teacher, I look at a lot of statistics, and when I first saw these statistics, I thought, nah, this is nonsense. There's no way that a set of schools could have such different outcomes to other schools. There's just no way. But I've looked into it, and as best I can tell, this is 100% legit. University of Notre Dame is a very serious university, and this is a very serious study that's been going on for decades. 90% of classical Christian school graduates still attend church. 90% of classical Christian school graduates still attend church weekly. You remember the stat from before? Less than 5% of Catholic graduates going to church weekly. They're also far more likely than their peers to pray, read scripture, to credit the school with preparing them for a vibrant spiritual life, to be likely to go to university, to succeed at university, to get a job, to participate in their community, to get married, to stay married, to be happy, to have clear goals and direction in life, to feel gratitude, hope, and trust. They were 6 times more likely to be readers, to be regular readers. So much for all the fear that Latin and Dante might hold them back. It seems to do something good. And when I say that they were better, I don't just mean, you know, here's the other schools, here's the classical Christian schools. I mean this. I don't want to bore you with a heap of statistics. Look up that report, and I guarantee your mind will be blown. The findings that surprise most people, though, concern the independence of mind. The charge usually laid against a school like this, you know, it's a kind of very focused school, is that they're hot houses of indoctrination. How long have I got left, Alex? 5 minutes, cool. The independence of mind measures were most interesting. Okay, the graduates of these classical Christian schools were twice as likely as the next ranked group, who it happens were homeschoolers, to say that they trusted and respected scientists more likely to see religion and science as compatible. Galileo would be pleased. They were more likely to say that society should be more tolerant of other religions, and also less likely to say that religion should be a private matter that's kept out of public debate. So they're tolerant, confident, publicly engaged, and unembarrassed about it. These aren't the fruits of indoctrination. These are the fruits of an education in how to think. Lewis's principle, in short, is visible in this survey data. The schools that put first things first, forming good human beings, are receiving the second things thrown in. Schools that put second things first are losing both. If you put first things first, you get literate, numerate, and faithful students. They're high achieving, happy, confident, moral. If you put second things first, you lose all of that. In the Catholic world, the closest analogues to these schools are the Chesterton Schools Network and the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education. The Chesterton Schools Network has now more than 70 schools worldwide, with a further 30 in development, one of which is ours here in Melbourne. They share a classical liberal arts curriculum, a joyful Catholic culture, deliberate partnership with parents. These schools are too young to have featured in that study yet. They will soon, I'm sure. But one statistic that we have that is noteworthy is that roughly 1 in 10 graduates of the Chesterton academies have entered seminary or religious life. 1 in 10 students of those schools. They have higher rates of graduates that enter into marriage and higher numbers of children from those marriages. The diocese where the original Chesterton Academy is located has more than half of its seminarians are graduates of the Chesterton Academy. Half of the seminarians are from this one school, the Chesterton Academy. And if all this sounds too good to be true, I mean, maybe it sounds too fanciful. A couple of years ago, I was fortunate enough to go to America for a couple of weeks with my family on a holiday. While I was there, I went and visited several of these classical schools. It's 100% real. I sat in the classrooms, I listened, I watched, and I was blown away. It's completely real. Now this renewal is here in Australia. For the first time, Australians are part of this story. There's classical liberal arts schools in every Australian state now, virtually. Maybe Tasmania might be the exception. There's 3 in Queensland, 3 in New South Wales, a primary school in Victoria, there's 1 in Adelaide, there's 2 in Perth, and there's several more in development. The movement here is young, but it's unmistakably a movement. And it's not just confined to independent startups. I think Kevin mentioned earlier, the leaders of the Catholic school systems in Sydney and Melbourne, they're looking very closely at integrating this into their schools. These are some of the largest school systems in Australia, indeed in the world, I believe. And there's also a growing homeschool movement, which in many ways is the leader in this field. In fact, I think in many ways Australia's leading experts in classical education are homeschooling mothers. They've been doing it for decades and they're probably the best. Kevin Donnelly mentioned his classical education conferences that he's been running for 5 years. Later this year, there's going to be a second National Liberal Arts Conference at Campion College. Campion College is now introducing a teaching masters, I believe. Have I got that right, John? Yep. So they're going to be training great teachers for these classical schools. And all these things don't educate children, of course, directly, but they're signs of a movement. And so to Melbourne. Our city is preparing for its first classical Prep to 12 school, the Chesterton Academy of Melbourne. It's going to be an independent, joyfully classical Catholic school that's going to open in 2028 in the northern suburbs of Melbourne. It's going to be a member of the Chesterton Schools Network, which means it's not starting from scratch, trying to reinvent the wheel, trying to do everything by itself. It's drawing on the experience of 70 schools that have already started, which gives us a map, a compass, and a big head start. And I can tell you, having embarked some way down this journey, it's a big thing, and it takes a lot of assistance to do it. There'll be Christ at the centre of the school. Faith formation will not be a subject that's just slotted into the timetable. It'll be the animating centre of school life. There'll be daily mass, daily prayer, the sacraments, sacred music, the lives of the saints, the rhythm of the church year, and a curriculum of truth, beauty, and goodness. The aim is not merely students that know about Christ and the church, but that grow in joy, love, and devotion. A Catholic culture that is visible, joyful, and demanding, forgiving, and alive, rather than a Catholic ethos that just hums faintly in the background. There'll be genuine partnership with parents. The school is being founded primarily for practicing Catholic families, but it's open to everyone who shares the vision. It'll have teachers who are serious about their faith, but it will ask something of its parents. It'll ask them to participate in regular formation events, to come to talks and community gatherings, so that the school and the home are rowing in the same direction, not politely paddling against each other. If belonging is the great social force that we talked about earlier, the school's task is to build a whole community that's worth belonging to, where children are surrounded by friends and teachers, role models, and families that are all trying to live the faith with seriousness and joy. And one of the cool things that I've encountered in learning about these classical schools is often the parents send their kids to the school because they want their kids to receive this education, and then they start hearing about all these awesome things that the kids are learning about at school. Oh, you're reading Dante? Wow, that's cool. And the parents get jealous and they want to start doing it too. And so the parents end up forming their own sort of study groups. Students will be known personally. A school can have a great curriculum, but lose sight of the individual child. Each student will therefore have a mentor that they meet with regularly and that meets with the parents and works closely with the parents to make sure the student's growing academically and spiritually. There'll be a feast of the liberal arts. Instead of a fast food menu that we talked about earlier, the feast will be rich, slow, nourishing, and shared around a common table. In the primary years, students will be nourished on stories, poetry, hymns, fairy tales, myths, and the lives of saints. They'll read Aesop's fables, Grimm's fairy tales, the Iliad, the Odyssey, King Arthur, and the Golden Legend. The gymnasium of the moral imagination that we described earlier. In the secondary years, they'll engage with the great books and great questions directly. Augustine, Aquinas, Dante, Dostoevsky, Chesterton, Lewis, and Tolkien. It's not enough to read about them, you've got to read them themselves, to engage with the authors. Through them, they'll encounter the permanent questions: God, the human person, justice, beauty, freedom, suffering, the meaning of life. Beneath it all, there'll be serious attention to the fundamentals: reading, writing, speaking, listening, memorization, art, music, singing, sport, and careful thought. Liberal education doesn't merely fill a bucket with facts, it lights a fire and teaches the child how to keep it burning for life. This is the soil of faith, the soil of saints, the soil of heroes. When a young boy reads The Lord of the Rings, he comes out wanting to be Aragorn. Okay, we want students that come out of their education, they want to take on, they want to fight the dragons of our world. This school will be low tech but high formation. Okay, the only tablet that our students are going to see are the ones that Moses brought down from the mountain. But this is not a rejection of technology. That's got its place, it's got its season. But a child's attention is like a young tree. It needs to be given deep soil and room to grow. It becomes strong and fruitful in this soil. If it's planted in the shallow rocks of a flashing screen, it withers. The school will stand with parents who are trying to protect childhood, delay smartphones, and give their children a richer, freer, and more human formation. It'll focus on character before credentials, so virtue formation's at the centre. And finally, an objection that I sometimes hear, Anna Crone and Tracy Rowland both mentioned this earlier, but sometimes classical education, it's seen as elitist, it's boutique, it's just for the, this small select group or something like that. People who are interested in Latin, who wear tweed jackets. The truth is the opposite. Liberal arts are called liberal because it's the education that makes men free. For most of Western history, this was the ladder that ordinary people used to rise in society. The man our network is named for, the Chesterton Academy is named for, he spent his career defending the common man against the dangerous fads of fashionable elites. In that spirit, the Chesterton Academy of Melbourne, it's designed to be affordable for families of average means and above average family size. This is a renewal that was only for the wealthy. It wouldn't be a renewal at all. Finally, in conclusion, Chesterton described education as the soul of a society as it passes from one generation to another. Christopher Dawson spent his life showing what happens to societies that attempt the passage with the soul left out. If they're right, the recovering of the purpose of education, it's not a boutique concern for the elites or nostalgic parents, it's a matter of cultural survival. Can Western civilization be renewed? Can it be saved? If so, this is absolutely crucial. Renewal requires parents, teachers, and communities willing to put first things first, to build schools where children sing, pray, read, think, wonder, laugh, compete, serve, and grow. The Catholic faith is not an add-on, but the living heart of the community. It's where students are challenged intellectually, where they're formed spiritually and nourished culturally, known personally. 1,000 new schools around the world are already doing this, and a dozen schools in Australia have begun. God willing, from 2028, Chesterton Academy will be doing it too. If you'd like to help, please come and talk to me afterwards. And finally, remember the parable of the sower? The sower's throwing seed on different soil. There's good soil, rocks, etc. Well, God is sharing the good news. The gospel's being shared. But it's our job to make sure that the soil that it lands on is rich soil. And I think that's what classical Catholic education does. Thank you.